And delighted to be joined now, ladies. For now, thank you, the chair of the Defence Select Committee, Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. That breaking news, Tobias, your response, my friend, please. Brilliant.
Well, just speaking in a personal capacity here, but everybody will perhaps be surprised, but not, I think this was somehow expected as well. We still wait for the details. Let's be clear on what this is. But as you were describing, this is what Russian leaders do when people get in their way. It is absolutely critical that any Russian leader looks strong, looks infallible. Anybody gets in your way, dares to challenge you, they get arrested, they get thrown in prison, or indeed possibly eliminated. And don't forget what Prigozhin did. He absolutely humiliated Putin. He lifted the lid on how bad Ukraine war was going, and he managed to get exiled to Belarus rather than being removed from the equation. And what we see now is he's disappeared, he's now gone forever, and Putin is able to go back to saying, look, I'm infallible, I'm providing the stability, I'm regaining my credibility. Whether that's enough or not, let's see what happens. But at the moment, Putin is not out of the woods yet, but yes, this is to be expected in what goes on in Russian politics.
It's quite interesting, and I was asking the ladies as we lined you up, and thank you for joining us as ever, Tobias, at short notice. You talk about how Russian leaders need to be seen as infallible, the iron fist of rule. Even though Prigozhin is apparently gone, and as we say, there will be news and updates throughout the night. As yet, 8 bodies have been found at the crash site. We just reported that. The last 4 digits of a registration number on the plane, Tobias, 2795, which is his plane. There is proof of that on social media. But does it not shine a light on the fact that for the first time in his rule, there is discontent, there is murmurings of because of Ukraine and other things? Does this not send a very strong message from the minute Prigozhin started to march to Moscow? It didn't matter whether he marched a mile or got there. That sent a message to the Russian people and the rest of the world that actually Putin isn't infallible. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, because Putin has been in power now for, what, 23 years. Nobody challenged him in the way that Prigozhin did. And nobody exposed to the Russian people. Don't forget, they get spun a picture of everything going so well in Ukraine, despite the high numbers of deaths there. But Prigozhin was able to lift the lid on that and say, no, it's not only going badly, we're not fighting well either. And yet he was rewarded for what he actually did. He became another hero, if you like. He was actually challenging Putin potentially to take over leading the Kremlin. And so Putin had no choice, I don't think. As I say, we have to wait to see what's going on. But it all looks like that is Putin's hands on this. What also has happened, don't forget, is General Zhidko is now dead. He was leading the Russian forces in Ukraine. He was then sacked, and suddenly he's actually ended up dying mysteriously in the last few days. General Segovin, who's also just been sacked as well, he was in charge of he was the aerospace minister, was in charge of the Russian engagement in Ukraine. He's been sacked as well. Don't forget, Putin's also was supposed to get some prestige by landing a rocket on the moon. That crashed as well. Nothing but bad news for Putin. And I think this is trying to regain control of the agenda, to show the Russian people that indeed he's in charge, because there will be lots of people in the Kremlin saying, hang on a minute, he's not as strong as he's looking. He is looking vulnerable. Perhaps it's time to move.
And interesting, just going back to it like a dog with a bone, there's that point, of course, people in the Kremlin. But does it start the belief that actually you can disagree with him? That's the point. You talk about how the Russian people are spun, and I take your point. Through the media and through everything they see, it's complete indoctrination. Would the Russian people see him dealing with Prigozhin as a position of him being powerful? Or would there start to be murmurings of actually how many people can you kill who disagree with you when actually you're doing such a crap job? That's how I see it from the outside, but inside Russia, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, this is the Dictator's Handbook, and what you're spelling out there is exactly what we could see unfolding in the next few weeks and indeed months. It's going to get more uncomfortable for Putin. He's going to have to, push down more and more on anybody that dares to criticize him as well. He's going to, blame the international community more on, interference in what's going on in Russia too. And no doubt he will try and do something dramatic, I believe, in Ukraine. We should watch out for that, to try and distract as well. and show that that campaign is on target, going in the right directions. The international community needs to watch very, very carefully as to what goes on. The geopolitics of Russia and indeed Eastern Europe are starting to move again, as Putin looks very, very weak indeed, but is looking to respond with strength.
Can I bring in something we wanted to talk to you about anyway before this breaking news tonight? China. We've heard today about China and BRICS and all the sorts of things about how, in basic layman's terms, does China want to rule the world? I've always thought that our strategy is quite strange. And China and Russia seem to be a massively important axis. Will he look to China? What is the impact of that alliance on the rest of the world? Because you've been talking about this for a long, long time, and people have gone, no, no, no. Surely if there is a power vacuum inside Russia, Prigozhin starts that, I don't know. What does that mean for the rest of the international community, Tobias?
You cover so many important points there. Firstly, there's this growing alliance between Russia and China. Russia is becoming, or Putin, I should say, is becoming ever more, subservient to China, ever more reliant on China for China's oil and gas, even for China's weapon systems and so forth, which seem to be getting into Russia via the back door. But the bigger picture that you touch on is the changing tectonic plates of where power lies after the end of the Cold War, because the West won, the Berlin Wall came down, it all seemed peace and harmonious. It was everybody international following the international rules-based order. No longer anymore. China is using the BRICS club to actually generate support for an alternative perspective, a different way of running the world with less onus, less scrutiny on transparency, governance, international rule of law, and indeed democracy. And that exactly suits Putin as well. The worry for the West is we become too complacent, indeed too risk-averse in standing up to China, with, as I say, is trying to rally countries like South Africa, even India, and indeed Brazil too. And we saw this with Ukraine. Ukraine was the litmus test, if you like, whether you supported Ukraine's efforts to flush Russia out or whether you stood on the sidelines. Too many countries we've seen in the global South are actually saying, I don't really want to be part of this. I'm not going to stand up and support the West in this endeavor. And that's a real concern of the bigger picture of where our world is going. We've entered a very difficult and bumpy decade as power shifts, alliances start to reform away from the West.
Tobias Ellwood, thank you as ever. Really kind of you to shit on at the last minute. Tobias Ellwood, Chair of the Defence Select Committee.